Imagine this. You're 5 years old, sitting in your room with tears streaming down your face. You don't remember what you did wrong, only that your mother slammed the door behind her after shouting that you were too sensitive and always overreacting. You reach for a toy, something familiar, but even that feels hollow. You're not being beaten, you're not starving, you're not locked away. And yet, a quiet ache forms in your chest, a confusion, a silent shame, a question you can't name yet. Is something wrong with me? Now flash forward 20 years. You're in a relationship that feels like emotional quicksand. You panic when someone raises their voice. You apologize for everything, even things that aren't your fault. You crave approval like oxygen. And still you defend your childhood. You say, "My parents did their best." You mean it, but the pain persists. How is it possible for parents to love their children and still emotionally damage them beyond repair? How can something that looks like care, sound like support, and wear the mask of love leave such deep scars? Is it possible that the very people who raised us with the best of intentions also wounded us in ways they never understood? And what if the damage isn't visible, not bruises on the skin, but fractures in the soul? If love can harm, then what does that mean for everything we thought we knew? Let's step into the shadow of that question. It begins with a truth so uncomfortable that most people spend their entire lives running from it. Parents can deeply hurt their children without ever intending to. Not through abuse that leaves visible wounds, but through patterns so subtle they're mistaken for normal. A sigh of disappointment, a withdrawn gaze, a smile that only appears when you're pleasing them. The way they call you dramatic, lazy, ungrateful, or too much, not in cruelty, but in passing, like facts about your nature. You internalize these moments as truth. And slowly, your self-image becomes shaped not by who you are, but by who you had to be to feel loved. Alice Miller, the Swiss psychoanalyst who dared to challenge the sacred cow of parental infallibility, wrote, "The truth about our childhood is stored up in our body, and although we can repress it, we can never alter it." Her work pierced through the illusion that love, in the hands of unhealed adults, cannot still become a weapon. According to Miller, most parents unconsciously replay the trauma of their own upbringing. They were not allowed to express rage, sadness, or neediness. So when their child shows those emotions, it threatens something buried in them. They suppress the child's authentic feelings, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of the pain they never faced. Fear of reliving what they were forced to forget. This is what Carl Jung called the shadow, the repressed aspects of the self that remain unconscious but shape everything. Parents who have not done their shadow work project it onto their children. The child becomes the battleground where the parent's denied self is fought and subdued. Imagine a father who was punished for showing weakness. He grows up to tell his son, "Don't cry, be a man." He thinks he's teaching strength. What he's doing is amputating emotional intelligence. The boy learns to suppress vulnerability. He becomes emotionally numb, disconnected. Years later, he won't be able to name what he feels, only that he feels nothing, or worse, rage. Friedrich Nietzsche, in his attack on herd morality, warned us about inherited beliefs disguised as virtue. What if obedience, silence, and perfectionism were never signs of being a good child, but evidence of survival? What if the well-behaved child was simply the one who learned early to suppress their essence? The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote that the deepest human suffering lies not in pain itself, but in its meaninglessness. And that's what happens when emotional neglect wears the costume of love. It becomes an invisible wound the child can't name and therefore can't grieve. There's no funeral for affection withheld, no scar for never being truly seen. But it's not just about psychology or philosophy, it's cultural. We live in a world where parenting is idealized, where questioning your upbringing is framed as betrayal. We're told they did their best, as if that erases impact. We're told to move on, forgive, let it go. But how can you release something you never fully allowed yourself to feel? Even religion and tradition reinforce this obedience. The commandment to honor your father and mother has often been used not as a call for mutual respect, but as a muzzle. A tool to silence children who dare question their emotional pain. This is the hidden problem. Our deepest wounds are often inflicted by the people who meant to protect us the most. And because their intentions were loving, we are left defenseless, unable to process what happened without guilt or shame. You begin to wonder, if they didn't mean to hurt me, does that mean I'm overreacting? If they loved me, does that mean this ache is my fault? This is the trap, and most people live their entire lives inside it. But the consequences go far beyond childhood memories. In fact, they shape everything: your identity, your relationships, your sense of self-worth, and that's where we must go next. You grow up, you move out, you become independent, and still, a voice whispers in your head before you speak your truth. Don't be dramatic. Keep the peace. It's not that serious. Where did that voice come from? It isn't yours. It's inherited, implanted, echoed. You carry your childhood not in your memories, but in your nervous system. This is the cruel genius of emotional neglect. It doesn't need to scream to be destructive. It operates in silence. And because it leaves no bruises, no broken bones, it's rarely named, but it shapes everything. Attachment theory explains that when a child consistently receives emotional attunement, being heard, validated, and comforted, they develop secure attachment. They trust the world, they trust others. Most importantly, they trust themselves. But when a child is ignored, dismissed, or emotionally invalidated, no matter how lovingly, it distorts their sense of reality. They begin to distrust their emotions. They internalize the idea that their needs are too much, that their pain is an inconvenience, that love must be earned through compliance, silence, and performance. And so they become adults who don't know how to cry without apologizing, adults who feel guilt for resting, adults who attract emotionally unavailable partners because unavailability feels familiar, safe, adults who chase achievement like a drug because that's how they first learned to feel seen. The result? A society of high-functioning, emotionally disconnected people, smart, successful, even charismatic on the surface, but terrified of intimacy, afraid to say I'm hurting, conditioned to endure rather than express. Trained to ask, what's wrong with me, instead of what happened to me. Neuroscience shows us that emotional pain lights up the same brain regions as physical pain, and yet we treat emotional wounds as if they should be healed by willpower alone. Cognitive distortions like catastrophizing, black and white thinking, and personalization are not just flaws in reasoning, they are defense mechanisms. The brain develops them to make sense of trauma that was never named. Patterns that began as survival become identity. You don't just fear rejection, you expect it. You don't just avoid conflict, you panic at its onset. You don't just crave validation, you depend on it like oxygen. All of this has a price. Suppressed emotions don't die, they metastasize. They become chronic anxiety, unexplained fatigue, mysterious illnesses, depression that has no origin story. Psychologist Gabor Mate often says that trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. Meaning, the true wound isn't the moment your mother dismissed your tears, it's the belief you formed because of it. My feelings don't matter. I have to be strong for everyone else. Love is conditional. And those beliefs don't live in your thoughts. They live in your nervous system, your posture, your relationships, your silence. Culturally, we romanticize resilience. We praise those who turned out fine. But turning out fine is often a trauma adaptation. It means you learned how to function, yes, but at what cost? There's another danger too, repetition. Many who were emotionally neglected go on to repeat the same pattern with their own children. not out of malice, but because that's the only language of love they know. A father who was never allowed to express fear may shame his son for crying. A mother who was constantly judged may unknowingly pressure her daughter to be perfect. The cycle continues, not out of evil, but ignorance. But ignorance does not erase the wound. So the question becomes, if we cannot see the damage, how do we heal it? What does it mean to finally rebel against this quiet inheritance? The answer isn't comfort. It's not found in affirmations or surface-level forgiveness. It demands something deeper, something radical, a total redefinition of what love is and what self-respect requires. It begins with a whisper, not the voice you inherited, but the one you buried. At first, it speaks in questions. Why do I shrink when someone raises their voice? Why do I apologize for existing? Why do I always feel like a fraud, even when I succeed? And then it speaks in truth, because you were taught that love required self-erasure. To break free is not just to heal, it is to rebel. Alice Miller called it the awakening of the real self, a moment when you stop justifying the harm that was done to you and start naming it without guilt. It's the moment you realize that love, when it suppresses, controls, or conditions your identity, is not love. It's emotional colonization. You were raised to believe that rebellion is disrespect, that to question your upbringing is betrayal. But the greatest betrayal is abandoning yourself to preserve someone else's illusion of goodness. To rebel is to grieve what you were denied, to say, yes, they did their best, but it wasn't enough, to say they loved me and they hurt me. Both can be true. This is a radical act in a society addicted to binary thinking, where parents are either saints or villains, and children are either grateful or ungrateful. But you are neither. You are a human being trying to untangle love from pain. Carl Jung argued that true individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires confronting the shadow, not just the one inside you, but the ones projected onto you, the roles you were forced to play, the emotions you were told to hide. Rebellion means reclaiming what you were shamed for, your sensitivity, your anger, your longing, your boundaries. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space, that's where rebellion is born. Here's what rebellion might look like in practice. You speak when your voice shakes, because silence is no longer an option. You rest without guilt, because worth is not earned through exhaustion. You stop explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. You choose not to become the parent you had, but the parent you needed. You begin to reparent yourself, not through platitudes, but through presence. You stop chasing approval from people who made you feel small. You set boundaries that make others uncomfortable, because your comfort no longer comes last. You realize that healing is not about fixing what's broken, it's about releasing what was never yours to carry. The fear, the shame, the silence. It all belonged to them, and now you're handing it back. But make no mistake, this rebellion is not easy. It may cost you relationships, closeness, even a sense of identity. It may leave you feeling like a traitor to your bloodline. But it also grants you something priceless, your freedom. Because freedom isn't found in pleasing others. It's found in honoring the truth, even when it's messy, painful, and inconvenient. The moment you say, I deserve better, you shatter the curse. You stop being the echo of your parents' pain and become the author of your own story. And in doing so, you offer your future children something sacred, a new legacy. One built not on silence, but on honesty, not on performance, but presence. But this rebellion is only the beginning. There's still one more truth to face, one that will not only explain your pain, but transform it. And that is where we go next. Here it is. The realization that waits beneath all the pain, all the silence, all the inherited guilt. You were never the problem. Not your tears, not your sensitivity, not your need for love, attention, or validation. Those were never flaws, they were signals, cries for connection that the people around you were too wounded to answer. And so they made your needs feel shameful. They taught you that who you are was too much, too loud, too needy, too dramatic, too intense. Not because it was true, but because your authenticity threatened their illusions. Alice Miller calls this poisonous pedagogy, the idea that children must be shaped, broken, disciplined into obedience for their own good. But what if the real damage isn't in what they did, but in what you had to do to survive it? You became someone else. You became likable, quiet, high-achieving, self-sacrificing. You became who they needed you to be, not who you were. And here lies the most powerful truth. You have mistaken adaptation for identity. All these years you thought you were broken, but what if the emptiness you feel is not a flaw, but the absence of your real self? That self didn't die, it was buried, beneath the roles, beneath the obedience, beneath the coping. It's still there, waiting for you to stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Who was I before I had to become someone else?" The final awakening is this: you cannot heal by becoming better at being what others needed. You can only heal by remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And to do that, you must stop trying to fix yourself and start grieving the loss of what was taken from you. Grieve the childhood that never truly saw you. Grieve the love that felt conditional. Grieve the silence you were forced to swallow. Grieve the belief that safety meant self-betrayal. Because when you grieve, you create space. And in that space, something sacred returns. Your truth. It will not come back as a roar. It will arrive as a whisper. You'll feel it when you say no for the first time without guilt. You'll sense it when you cry and don't apologize. You'll know it when you stop explaining your boundaries like a courtroom defense. This is not self-help. This is soul retrieval. And once you touch your truth, you begin to understand something else. Something devastating and liberating. Your parents did not fail you because they didn't love you. They failed you because they didn't know how to love themselves. And so they handed you their shame and called it love. But now you know better, and now you have a choice. You can spend your life managing the symptoms of this invisible inheritance, or you can dismantle it entirely, piece by piece, lie by lie, silence by silence. You can become the first in your bloodline to say, "This ends with me." And it's not because you're angry, it's because you're finally awake. Awake to the truth that you were always enough. Awake to the fact that survival is not the same as wholeness. Awake to the possibility that what was broken in you was never you. It was the mask you wore to be loved. And now you're taking it off, not for them, not for revenge, but for you. Because for the first time in your life, you're not surviving your story. You're writing a new one. There's a moment in every silent revolution where the world doesn't notice, but your soul does. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's when you speak your truth and don't flinch, when you sit in your sadness without rushing to escape it, when you choose to love yourself, not as a reaction, but as a reclamation. That moment is sacred, because it means you're no longer living as a reflection of someone else's pain. You're living as a reflection of your own truth. The child inside you is no longer waiting for permission to be real. You've given it. And yes, healing will still ache. You may still cry over things you thought you were done grieving, but that's okay. Pain, when felt fully, doesn't last forever. Repression does. The world doesn't need more obedient adults pretending to be fine. It needs awakened humans, those brave enough to look backward, speak forward, and live without masks. This was never about blaming parents. It's about breaking patterns. Because what we don't heal, we repeat. And what we heal, we release. For ourselves and for every soul that comes after us. So if your childhood left you scarred but silent, let this truth echo in your heart. You are not difficult. You were just never fully understood. And now finally, you're beginning to understand yourself. Let that be your revolution.